Hello. Today we're going to talk about Reconstruction. This is going to be chapter 16 in your textbook. So one of the first units we'll talk about in this class, Reconstruction. Okay, so where our class starts off is at the very end of the Civil War. So our time frame is really end of the Civil War up to the present, right? So 1865, technically 1877, till the present. So when we start our class, right, we're talking about the aftermath of the Civil War. The Civil War was a devastating conflict that has killed hundreds of thousands of people on both sides, right? It's one of the most bloody wars in American history. I believe more people died in the Civil War in America than the U.S.'s participation in World War I and World War II. Part of the reason why this war was so devastating, so deadly, is because they're using new military tactics and technology with this like old format of of warfare, like trench warfare. Battling in lines and stuff. So they're just taking turns shooting at each other, but that doesn't work if you have like machine guns, like a Gatling gun. So both sides, they're going to use these outdated tactics, and it's going to be devastating for the South. In particular, overall, more than 3 million people died in the Civil War. Or 3 million people fought in the Civil War, 500,000, 500,000 people died. That's 2% of the country's population at the time. And then many more were wounded, maimed, and stuff in the process. The South, who lost the Civil War under the Confederate States of America, they faced the brunt of the losses. So, for example, General Sherman, he is going to be a Union general, and his job is to march into the Confederate States of America and try to cripple the Southern war effort at any cost. So we call this Sherman's March to the Sea, when Sherman's marching from Atlanta to Savannah. And he tells his soldiers that on anything they cross, right, any roads, any plantations, any railroad tracks, they need to destroy it. So it's this whole slash and burn military tactic to crush the Southern war effort, and it works. The South was the main, Atlanta in particular was the main railroad hub of the South, and Sherman totally destroyed this industry in the process. So the South is, this is just an example of like the devastation that the Civil War had on the South. For example, General Sherman told his soldiers that any railroad tracks that they crossed, they need to pick them up, and then they did something called like a Sherman necktie, where they would tie the railroad ties around a tree. Some parks in Georgia today still have these Sherman neckties. That's what they called it, when they take those steel bars, wrap them around the trees and stuff. So about 2/3 of the Southern railroads were destroyed in the process. So needless to say, the South was in dire straits. They're having a tough time. Most of their major cities are destroyed. Atlanta being the key example. Most of Atlanta, like 90% of it, got burnt down to the ground. And this begins after the Civil War. After all that destruction was done, we start this new period called Reconstruction. So when we begin Reconstruction, the people at this time had a few questions, right, of how the South was going to look, right? So the first thing is, what about the legal status of former slaves? One of the main causes of the Civil War was over this issue of slavery. The Union wanted to end slavery. The South, the Confederate States of America, wanted to maintain the practice of slavery. But since the South lost, the Union decided to free all the slaves. But the question is, what is the legal status for these freed slaves? Are they going to be given the same rights as white citizens in our country, or are they going to have lesser rights? These are the questions that they are dealing with. And there's about 4 million former slaves that need to be reincorporated into American society. Most of these people have lived their whole lives in bondage without any rights or very, very limited rights. So, these people, 4 million of them, that's a huge chunk of the Southern's population, need to get reintroduced into American society, right, as citizens instead of slaves. And then also there's this question of how should we rebuild the South? Is it going to remain a plantation agricultural institution like it was before the Civil War in the antebellum times? Or is it going to transform its cities and become more industrialized like the northern Union cities? So the first of these things, before we could deal with any of those other questions, right, is how do we readmit the South into the Union? The South fought this whole war against the Union to break off from the United States to get its independence, but they lost. So what are they just going to have like a slap on the wrist? Are they going to, or are they going the North going to punish them and make it harder for them to re-enter the Union? So the leader of Reconstruction at the very beginning is Abraham Lincoln. He is the president who led America through the Civil War, brought the country back together, freed the slaves. So at the end of the Civil War, it looks like Lincoln is going to lead Reconstruction. And this is what we call presidential Reconstruction, the first phase of this Reconstruction process. So Lincoln has this thing called the 10% plan, okay? So he comes up with this 10% plan even before the Civil War was over. His main thing, when he took the oath of office, when the Civil War happened, his main concern was to bring the country back together. Even before his policy changes to freeing all the slaves, his main concern at the beginning of the Civil War is mending the country back together. But now that the Civil War is over, he needs to put those plans into reality. So his plan is that only 10% of those who voted in the 1860 election had to take an oath of loyalty, a loyalty oath. So as long as 10%, let's say of the state of Georgia, if 10% of the voting population of the state of Georgia agrees to become part of the United States again, the rest of it, the other 90%, even if they don't agree, they could get readmitted into the Union. 10% of the state's population is really small considering this whole Civil War happened. Hundreds of thousands of people died. So it was a very generous offer. But also, in addition to this 10% plan, he said that these new states, right, they need to remake constitutions that are Republican. So they promote free and fair elections. They need to guarantee the permanent freedom of former slaves, and they need to provide education for these new freedmen, right? They need to provide some sort of service to introduce them into the country. So if the southern states did these things, 10% of them agreed to take a loyalty oath, promoted free and fair elections, guaranteed the rights of freed slaves, then they could get readmitted into the Union. So overall, it's a pretty generous plan. But it's going to face a lot of pushback, especially amongst Congress. So in Congress, right, Abraham Lincoln is part of the Republican Party. And in the Republican Party itself, there's a faction called the Radical Republicans. So don't get, we're going to be talking about like Republicans and Democrats and stuff. The Republicans and Democrats at this time are completely different than our modern political parties. So take what you know about the modern Republican and Democratic political parties, throw it out the window. We are talking about these Democrats and Republicans. So the Republican Party was mainly founded on this premise of freeing slaves. And whenever Abraham Lincoln, who ran under this Republican platform, took office, that's what sparked this Civil War to happen. The Democrats, mainly in the South, wanted to maintain this practice of of slavery, and that's why the Democratic Party rebelled against the Union to start the Civil War. So the Democrats completely different at this time. So the radical Republicans, they did not like Lincoln's 10% plan. They said that Lincoln was going too easy on the Southerners. That it should be harder for the Southerners to get readmitted into the United States of America. They just fought this whole Civil War, so there needs to be something extra that they have to do. It can't just be 10%. So in 1864, the radical Republicans, they passed this Wade-Davis bill. Okay, so this Wade-Davis bill says instead of just 10% of the population needs to take a loyalty oath, it says that a majority of Southerners in that state has to take a loyalty oath. So, for example, Georgia, at least 51% of the population needed to take this oath of loyalty in order to get readmitted into the Union. So 51% is a lot harder than 10%. So this is a less generous plan by far compared to Lincoln's presidential Reconstruction plan. So also, in addition to this, they said that any Confederate officials or anyone who voluntarily bore arms against the United States was barred from voting. Now, in the South, most Southerners, in some way or another, participated in the Civil War. So this is basically saying that a majority of the Southern population will not have full civil rights, considered to be full Americans. So this bill, the Wade-Davis bill, passes through Congress, and whenever a bill passes through Congress, it goes to the president and the White House to sign. So this Wade-Davis bill goes to Abraham Lincoln to sign. So one of the powers of the presidency is that a president could veto a bill. So even though Congress passes the bill, a president could veto it, saying like, no, I'm not going to sign this bill into law. Now, the thing is, if Abraham Lincoln flat out just signed this bill saying, no, the Wade-Davis bill will not go into law, what happens then is the bill goes back to Congress to re-vote on. So Abraham Lincoln, he wants to go easy on the South. He doesn't want this Wade-Davis bill to pass. So he's going to do something a little sneaky. He's going to find a loophole. Instead of just flat out saying, no, I'm going to veto this bill, instead he's going to do something called a pocket veto, which is basically saying he's going to take this bill, put it in his pocket, and wait the clock out, right? Wait until the bill expires, so then Congress can't re-sign it into law. So this is essentially Lincoln saying, no, Congress has no power in how we're going to do Reconstruction. It's just going to be me. So at this point, it looks like presidential Reconstruction is going to continue. So what did this presidential Reconstruction under Lincoln look like? Well, unfortunately, we do not know this answer because he is going to be assassinated. So just to put it in perspective, right? On April 5th, 1865, Lincoln visits the recently captured city of Richmond. Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy. So Lincoln visits the former capital of the Confederacy. A few days later, then there's going to be the South is going to officially surrender. And then a few days after that, so April 9th, that's when the Civil War officially ends. On April 14th, Lincoln's feeling pretty good, right? He's like, hey, we need to just take a breath. We need to relax. We finally ended the Civil War. So he took his family over to the Ford's Theater to watch a play. So while he's sitting watching this play in the Ford's Theater, there's going to be an actor in this play who's a Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth. He's going to sneak into the president's viewing box, and he's going to shoot Abraham Lincoln in the head, killing him. So John Wilkes Booth, he hated Abraham Lincoln. He said that he was a tyrant, and that was his motives for killing him, assassinating him. So early the next morning, Abraham Lincoln died, and his dreams of mending the North and the South together under his presidential Reconstruction plan ended. So Lincoln, he wanted the 10% plan, a speedy readmittance into the Union. And this was, but many radical Republicans are worrying that this is a little too weak, right? So this is a little interesting. If you ever have a chance to listen to it, it's on YouTube. This is a rare audio of a person who lived through Abraham Lincoln's assassination. He was in the Ford's Theater as John Wilkes Booth shot Abraham Lincoln. So it's sort of crazy that we, at this point in history, right, we have people who were alive long enough to actually get their stories recorded on audio of this. So it's very interesting, voices from the past. He was just a little kid whenever he witnessed this assassination, but it really stuck with him, right? And this is going to shake America, right? So all over America, there's going to be newspaper articles of Lincoln being shot. Abraham Lincoln's his funeral procession is going to take months. They're going to embalm him, put him in a casket, and then send him to various cities across America as sort of like a farewell tour for Abraham Lincoln until he meets his final resting place, which is in Springfield, Illinois. I got to see his tomb over the summer. Very cool place. And his whole family is sort of buried in this mausoleum in Springfield, Missouri, Springfield, Illinois, where he used to be governor or senator. All right, so Abraham Lincoln, he is assassinated, right? And in the United States, when a president is unfit for office or ends up dying while he's in office, the vice president then takes over. So Lincoln's vice president was this guy, Andrew Johnson. So Andrew Johnson, he was never meant to become president, right? The whole reason why Abraham Lincoln wanted Johnson as his vice president is because he was a Southerner. And he thought that if he had a Southerner as his vice president, it would help win over a lot of Southern people, win them over and trust them to get readmitted back into the Union. So Johnson was just sort of like a figurehead. He was never really meant to become president, but since Abraham Lincoln got assassinated, he had to really step in and fill those shoes. So Johnson, he wanted to continue presidential Reconstruction. He kept Lincoln's 10% plan. He just tweaked a little bit of the rules. So same sort of rules, 10% of the population need to take a oath of loyalty. Also, they needed to promote rights for freed slaves and free voting. But also what makes Johnson's plan a little different is he said that the planter elite, the people who own these large plantations, the core leaders of the Confederacy, what they needed to do to get readmitted into the Union is that they needed to write Johnson a personal letter apologizing for fighting in the Civil War and asking, please let me rejoin the Union. So that's what makes his plan a little bit different. So Congress had no interest in Johnson. They barely tolerated Abraham Lincoln because Lincoln got the country through the Civil War. Johnson is just a Southerner, right? So many of the radical Republicans do not trust him. He's no Lincoln. They wanted to take the control over Reconstruction away from the presidency, and Congress wanted to control Reconstruction themselves. So this is a picture of Andrew Johnson getting sworn in as president shortly after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, got into his plan. Let's see. So radical Republicans, they did not like Johnson's plan whatsoever. They said that it was still very angry, right? And there's two reasons for his anger, right? It's one, that he's a Southerner, and two, he's not going hard enough on the South to get them readmitted into the Union. So Congress sort of sets Johnson up, right? They want Johnson out of the presidential Reconstruction game. Congress wants to control Reconstruction for themselves. So Congress is going to impeach Johnson. Johnson is going to be one of the first. He's going to be the first president ever to be impeached. So, to be impeached, it means that there's going to be an accusation that the president broke a law in some way. So the tenure of so Congress says that Johnson was guilty of passing the Tenure of Office Act. So this Tenure of Office Act, it was just saying that Johnson was putting people in charge without Congress's permission, which is totally false, right? So any president could be impeached, but that's just like an accusation. It doesn't mean they actually did it. So Johnson went to trial, and they found that he didn't break this Tenure of Office Act. He did nothing wrong, but so he was acquitted. So even though Johnson was acquitted and he still remained president, he never held the same amount of power as he did before, right? So Johnson essentially is going to lose all power, all say when it comes to Reconstruction. So Johnson's impeachment, that's going to make him lose power. This is what's going to officially do the final nail in the coffin of presidential Reconstruction. All right, so now that Johnson is out, right, he is impeached. He's just like a lame duck president for the rest of his presidency. He can't do much. Congress is really going to take the reins of this Reconstruction. So Congress is going to, this radical Reconstruction is going to be led by two people in particular, Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens. These are like some of the most radical Republicans in Congress. They really wanted to punish the South for rebelling in the Civil War, for causing the Civil War. So what the radical Republicans are going to do is in 1867, they're going to pass the Reconstruction Acts. So the Reconstruction Acts is going to place the former Confederate states, the 10 states that rebelled against the Union, under military control. So they're going to split up the former Confederacy, the South, into 5 military districts. And so also they're going to pass a few different amendments, which we will get into right now. So you need to know these Reconstruction amendments. They might show up on a future assessment, so they're very important. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, right? Starts in 1865 while Abraham Lincoln's still alive. 13th Amendment frees slaves. It says that there is no indentured servitude or slavery in the United States. Funny enough, besides one place, there's still one place in the United States where slavery is still legal, and that's actually the prison. So prisoners and stuff, they're technically slaves of the state. But, in public, right, no one could own slaves. The 14th Amendment was proposed in 1866, finally passed in 1868, and this said that all people born in the United States, except Native Americans, were granted federal civil rights. So this is saying that these slaves who are now freed under the 13th Amendment have rights protected under the federal government. Now, they didn't say equal rights, right? So these freed slaves technically won't have equal rights, and the amount in which this 14th Amendment is going to be enforced is going to be dubious at best. But it's a step in this right direction. And then the 15th Amendment, which was passed in 1870, this is going to say that all men have the right to vote in the United States. No matter what, they can't be denied because of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. So if you used to be a slave, but you're not anymore under the 13th Amendment, and you're a man, you could still vote in the United States. That's what the 15th Amendment does. So these three things, this is a huge deal, right? This is this is the key platform of these radical Republicans to pass these amendments. So you just need to keep in mind, presidential Reconstruction wants to go easy on the South. That's like the 10% plan and stuff. The radical Republicans, they want to punish the South. They're going to divide the South into 5 military districts. They're going to pass these Reconstruction amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And then also they're going to create a new agency, which we'll talk about in our next presentation, about it's the Freedmen's Bureau, and this is going to help the newly freed population gain education and introduce them into American society as full American citizens. All right, so in our next lesson, we will talk about social reconstruction. Okay, so what that looks like. So thank you for your attention. Please make sure you fill out this, do the Chapter 16 quiz, and if you have any questions, let me know. All right.